Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining this webinar. We'll be starting here in just about a minute. We're going to allow a few more folks to jump into the chat, into the webinar, and then we will get started. So just again, another 30 to 60 seconds, and then we'll get going. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, thanks for joining this webinar. Everyone who is in the chat, we appreciate you showing up on a Sunday morning, or maybe a little bit later in the day, depending on where you are in the world. We obviously wanted to get a webinar out following the events overnight. Of course, the United States dropped 14 bunker buster bombs on a number of Iranian nuclear facilities. Overnight, we had Pete Hegseth speak further on the situation early this morning, detailing the fact that they did indeed push 14 bombs into Iran. And so the United States has decided to now take an offensive posture within the broader war between Israel and Iran. We're going to break all of this stuff down. We're going to talk about what we're seeing on the vessel side of things, kind of what our expectations are moving forward. And so with that, I am joined by Amina, who is our head of OPEC analysis, Hamayun, who heads up our broader crude oil analysis here at Kepler, and Yui, who is a senior market analyst, and she really handles the data side of things, watching these vessels in detail. So again, we're going to break into things. I'm going to hand it off to Amina to provide some commentary. Then Hamayun will take over, and then we'll finish off with Yui. The last 10 to 15 minutes of this webinar will be for questions. Go ahead and start sending them in now, and we will attempt to get to them at the end. With that being said, I'll hand it off to Amina.
Thank you so much, Reed, and thank you for everyone joining us. As Reed mentioned, that these events are happening over a weekend. Of course, we haven't been sleeping for the past few days covering this progressing story. As predicted, and as we indicated in our Insights report that came out on Friday, Trump indeed decided to join the conflict, and he joined it on a weekend when the markets were closed. So we managed to predict that ahead of time, and if you're not part of the Insights subscriptions, I highly recommend you do that. So given the fact that this attack was very much anticipated by all parties, everyone was kind of talking about this for a very long time. The extent of the reaction, since it was expected, it was minimal. And now what I'm seeing, I mean, all eyes are really on how Iran is planning to retaliate. Trump immediately put out a statement saying that retaliation will be met by U.S. force, etc. Especially that in the Gulf region we have a number of U.S. bases here, and Iran had previously said that it would target U.S. bases in the Gulf if the U.S. joins the conflict. So this is something that we're following. But from what I can see from the Iranian side and the kind of language being used, especially by the foreign minister who gave out the first statement or the first speech in Istanbul, it's a very measured speech, a lot of legal language there. And what we've been hearing from sources on the ground is that the retaliation or the reaction is also going to be a measured one. So far, we saw that Iran immediately launched an attack on Israel. 27 missiles were launched on Israel following the U.S. offense. Now, of course, we're looking at the energy market. So at stake here, we have all of the major exporters in the region. And there were headlines just now that the Iranian parliament approved the closure of Hormuz and is just awaiting another body to approve that. Despite that, I think that still, and this is a view again shared with my colleagues at Kepler, that we think that it's unlikely for Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz. This would hurt Iran's interest. It would hurt its major ally, China. So we see that as an extreme scenario. Saying that, I mean, all options are on the table. It's a very volatile environment. It's hard to say 100% that this will not happen or that will happen, but it's just unlikely given the circumstances. Also, it's unlikely, just given the information that we have now, that we see Iran target US bases in the Gulf region. So saying that, when markets open tomorrow, there's still going to be a reaction. We do expect oil prices to jump further. They've been trading, Brent has been trading around $77 a barrel. Perhaps we will see a spike from there, but any interruption in Hormuz, given that it's a major waterway, you have 20% of the world's supply passing through there. And despite the availability to divert some of these barrels through either the East-West pipeline or the pipeline in the UAE, which can collectively divert maybe 6.5 million barrels a day, we would still see a major spike in prices, perhaps into the three-digit if we do have an interruption of supplies there. But given the situation now, we do see the oil price rising when oil markets open, but perhaps it would drop back again. That's kind of, depends on the risk appetite and how much the market is willing to dismiss. And over the past, I've just been seeing a lot of traders getting immune to geopolitical risk. So we're putting some of that analysis in there that there might be the idea that the traders are not going to be factoring in so much of the political risk unless we have a major disruption in supplies. Now, on the OPEC front, so far the group is not talking about any kind of extraordinary meeting or any plans to add additional supplies. The meeting that they have between the OPEC 8 group is still scheduled on the 6th of July. And the kind of base case scenario there is adding 411,000 barrels, which is a repetition which we've seen in June, July, and for May, June, July, for the 3 months. So for the month of August, they're likely to continue that pattern. So for now, I would say OPEC Plus has no extraordinary plans unless we see a major disruption in supplies. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Reed.
Should I take over, Reed?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Hamid.
Yeah,
Because you
thanks
said
for
you were
that. I
going
mean, I'm
to
gonna
hand
go
that
ahead and hand it off to Humayun, and he's gonna take over from here.
Yeah, sure. So it's good, Amina, that you mentioned OPEC Plus, because I think just to confirm with you that it's very likely now that there's going to be another accelerated hike in August, right? So another 411 KBD, if not more, if there's supply disruptions, right? Just wanted to double confirm that.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. All right. So let's just take a closer look at some of those points that you've talked about. So looking at the map, you can see the installations that were hit here on the left chart. So you can see a map of Iran. You can see the three installations, Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz, that have been hit. In the center, or rather north of the country, close to Tehran. The main one really was Fordo, which is buried about 90 meters deep on the ground. And according to the Pentagon, it has been severely damaged. So obviously the Iranians are saying something different. They're saying that we've seen only limited damage. But yeah, I mean, I guess we need to wait for a few more days, even weeks, to see exactly what happened. Just a quick note to say that there has been a line of trucks outside of Fordo that has been spotted by satellite imagery. And the question is, what were they there for? There's three main scenarios. Either they were there to take the uranium, the enriched uranium out of the facility. So it's about 400 kilos of uranium, relatively easy to transport because it is in a solid state. The second option is maybe they were there to take out the centrifuges, which it seems that there are thousands of them. And the third option is that maybe they were there to take to bring in rocks maybe or other materials that would further make the facility robust and prevent a hit from damaging it severely. Looking at the oil markets again, since the attack on the South Pars Phase 14 facility, which is here in the south of the country at the Kangon site, so just on shore, just on the other side, you have the South Pars gas field. Since the attacks on these and the attacks on, you've had the one fuel depot, the Sharon fuel depot next to Tehran, and another one at the Tehran refinery, another storage tank for products that have been hit. But since then, you didn't have any other direct attacks on the energy situation. If you look at the where the crude carriers are right now, so you can see that on the map on the right, you see the green dots, the green arrows show you the laden vessels. The orange ones show you the ballast vessels, and you can see that there is kind of an accumulation of these vessels outside of the Gulf, as you can see here in the Gulf of Oman on the right in the east, and that is actually confirmed in our data. So it is a confirmation that the vessel operators are acting in a more cautious way, and that means that future loadings from the Gulf, the Middle East Gulf, is probably going to be slightly coming down because of a lack of availability of those ballast vessels. Now, looking at so far what has happened in terms of loadings and exports from the Persian Gulf by country, you can see that on the left chart, which shows you the loadings on a daily basis over the past 3 months. And you can see that actually after the first attacks that took place on the 13th, we've seen an increase in the amount of loadings from these countries. So could be pointing at the fact that maybe these set of countries, including Iran itself, actually were wanting to load as much oil as possible and get it further away from the Gulf as much as possible, as fast as possible. But you see that over the past few days, so that was true in the first 3-4 days after the attacks on the 13th. And since then, it has kind of declined, and we've come back to normal loading levels. So you can see the 10-day moving average here in yellow, showing you that there was a bit of a spike, and then we've kind of come back down to normal activity. That said, again, if you look at the number of ballast vessels in the Persian Gulf right now, on average over the past 12 months, it used to be around 65. The count. So that's what you can see on the right chart, and it has been coming down, and right now it's around a bit more than 50. Again, showing that maybe the lower availability of vessels means that we could be seeing lower loadings from this group of countries in the next few days and weeks. But my colleague Yui will take you over all this in more details. So I was mentioning the fact that Iran itself also has been loading quite, at a normal pace. Actually, and actually, again, the first few days after the attack on the 13th, we've seen loadings increase in terms of pace. So the first 4 or 5 days, it was at a pace of about 2 million barrels per day, even higher than the monthly average exports of 1.8 million barrels per day that was in May. So that was the new post-sanctions record, 1.8. So the first 4 or 5 days we've seen about 2 million barrels per day, but it has since been coming down. And so the average in June so far is at 1.65, 1,650,000 KBD coming out of Iran. But you can see that the goal really is to push these barrels as close as possible to the end market, which is China. And you see that the volumes reaching Singapore, Malaysia have really increased in the past few days. And likewise, the volume right now standing in the Yellow Sea is at an all-time high, actually. And so in total, the volumes of Iranian oil in floating storage has moved up from 28 million barrels just a week ago, or 8-9 days ago, to 35 million barrels. Actually, yeah, the graph is not showing it perfectly, but it's right now at 35 million barrels. Again, most of them in Eastern Asia. Demand for this crude from Iran, despite the risk, is going to remain strong because the discount on Iranian oil is still quite attractive. We think that right now, so before the attack, it was at minus 3.5, and actually this has we think come down to about -5, and actually the data is from Argus Media. And we believe that if right now it's at -$5 per barrel compared to Brent, you compare it with the competition, and it's about at least $5-6 cheaper than oil from the Middle East, even $7-8 cheaper than oil from the Atlantic Basin. And if you look at the margins from these Shandong refineries in Asia, it's at $8 per barrel on average. So having a discount of at least $5 per barrel is absolutely massive for them. That means that demand from these buyers in China is going to remain robust. Now, the key question is, as Amina mentioned, is really the possibility of a Strait of Hormuz closure. And just to state the fact and what we mean again. So if you saw our webinar last week, we already showed this chart on the right. So it shows you the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. You have about 1/3 of global oil supply that is traded on ships that transits via the strait. So that's about 15 million barrels per day. And we'll see on the next chart that there is a limited volume out of these that could bypass the Strait of Hormuz. But the other impact is that we're probably going to see a resumption of attacks from the Houthis in Yemen around the Red Sea and around the Bab el-Mandeb. And on the left chart, you can see the volumes of oil that is transiting via the Red Sea, either from Russia to Asian markets or from the Middle East to European markets. And you see that the volume so far in 2025, there are slightly above 2 million barrels per day, about 2.4 million barrels per day. That's about halving compared to 2 years ago. Now, I think the Houthis are going to resume attacking, but at the same time, I think out of these 2.4 million barrels per day, you have at least 1.4, if not 1.5 million barrels per day that is Russian oil going to the east. So it's hard to see the Houthis attack tankers carrying Russian oil. So it kind of, again, decreases the risks that exist out there. Now, looking at the facilities, the pipelines that could help some of the countries in the region bypass the Strait of Hormuz. The main one is the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia, which is shown here on the map on the left. So the pipeline actually, Amina, you mentioned the capacity earlier, but actually Aramco has announced in its latest annual report that they've managed to increase the capacity from 5 million barrels per day to 7 million barrels per day. Now, if you assume that this is true, 7 million barrels per day, we think that this would mean a utilization rate of 35% right now. So there is room to increase volumes going to that pipeline by 4.5 million barrels per day compared to what is the case right now, because that pipeline supplies crude that is exported from the West Coast, but also a series of refineries located on Saudi's West Coast, including Yasref, Yamref, and so on. The other pipeline is the Atka pipeline, which brings crude from onshore Abu Dhabi here on the right map to the East Coast UAE, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. That pipeline has a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day, and we think right now the utilization rate is around 73%. So that means another 400 KBD could pass through that pipeline. So in total, it'd be about close to 5 million barrels per day that could be diverted via those two pipelines. But again, you remember the previous slide, there's 15 million barrels per day coming out from the Gulf. So it's not enough to move out all of that crude, of course. Iran itself has another terminal located outside of the Gulf, the Josk terminal here, which is just outside of the Gulf. But we think it is only partially built. The capacity is around 300 to 500 KBD in terms of loadings. And there's only been one loading ever from this terminal last year in October. So it's also a reason why Iran probably will not do it. We think the likelihood is very low. Actually, if I were to give a number on it, I would say maybe a probability, I would say less than 5%, because Iran itself would not be able to export as much. And the other reason, beyond the countries in the region, and also the fact that actually the strait is operated half-half between Iran and Oman, that means that if Iran closes the strait, it's actually violating the territorial waters of Oman, a country that is key to Iran because this is where negotiations have been taking place in the past few months and years. So also another reason why it won't take place. But the main reason is really China. You look at China's oil imports, almost half of them come from the Middle East, at least when we talk about seaborne oil. That's about 47% of China's oil that comes from the Gulf, not just from the Middle East, actually, from the Persian Gulf. And so if you assume that the strait is closed, and you look at the level of Chinese oil inventories, the oil inventories are at around right now 1.1 billion barrels. That's enough to satisfy about 2.5 months of Chinese consumption. So obviously, if the strait is closed, China will go for alternatives. Imports would not drop to zero, but still, it would be a big stress test for the Chinese downstream system and generally for the China's oil sector. With China a main backer of Iran politically, and China having a seat in the UN Security Council, we also think that makes a very important point why Iran will not close the Strait of Hormuz. Moving on, just to focus a little bit on the downstream sector in Iran, we have come up with an analysis that we published sent to our clients and in midweek, highlighting the fact that out of Iran's refineries, so Iran has a refining capacity of about 2.5 million barrels per day. We actually estimate that there's 1 million barrels per day out of those that are more subject to risk of being targeted if the conflict further escalates. And so these ones are the Esfahan and the Tehran refinery and the Arak refinery because they are close to high demand consumption centers. If Israel wants to escalate this and wants I would say the government in Iran to struggle with fuel supply, because that could risk to potential civil unrest, maybe these are the potential targets. You also have the Abadan refinery, which is Iran's largest oil refinery, and the Persian Gulf Star refinery, the 450 kbd condensate refinery is also absolutely key because it supplies almost half of the country's gasoline, actually. Looking at Israel, also the country faces a lot of challenges in the next few weeks because the Haifa refinery is down for at least 1 month. Haifa is supplying 2/3 of Israel's fuels. And the Ashkelon refinery, it's a smaller one, about 110 kbd capacity, is undergoing maintenance right now. So right now there's no fuel supply coming out of Israeli refineries, but it's also an important point to mention that Israel is also an importer of products. And actually a large chunk of these products, especially diesel, comes from Russia. And Russia is having, officially at least, they are supporting Iran in this war. But it's something to highlight the fact that obviously everything is not crystal clear, and Russia has interest in the Israeli market as well. Very final slide is simply to look at a closer look at the middle distillates. So more than 50% of jet fuel requirements in Northwest Europe comes from the Persian Gulf area. So far, the market has, showed quite a muted response to the conflict, but obviously it is now facing a systemic risk. We're also in the middle of summer demand season, and right now the U.S. Gulf Coast is kind of unable and unwilling to shift yields and try to help Northwest Europe in the short term. And so that means that the uptick that we've seen in gas oil markets probably is going to be spilling over into jet fuel markets as well in the short term. So this is not obviously just a crude story, but it's also impacting products as well. And Florian, I actually pass on over to you, Yui, and I think you may want to share
very
your
much. I want to share the screen, so let me do that right now. Thank you. I hope you see the screen now. I'll hold on a sec. There you are. So I hope you see the screen by now.
Yeah, we see it.
Yeah, right. So Already the Humayun mentioned about all this, the matrix that we monitor very carefully when it comes to like the situations in the Strait of Hormuz, and then if the Middle East Gulf exporting what's any disruption taking place so far. And so far, the short answer, no, there is no such things like disruptions by saying. And I will try to dissect with the methodologies behind it to just explain one by one from the terminal to say why we came to the conclusion so far, and what would be the key points to look into day to day to monitor the situation. So on the 12th of June, just right before the attacks to the rebound took place, the ballast vessel was around 61 vessel empty within the Middle East Gulf zone, which if you see it in the polygons, you can just select the Middle East Gulf, and then you filter down only the region. You can see exactly where we put the boundary. Within that part, you see the 61 vessels were ballast and floating. And from there, as soon as the attack took place, we saw quite a substantial decline all the way to below 50 by the 16th of June. And then from there, gradually came back to not right, just about the points where we started, around 50, 60 around vessel. And I stopped it in 21st of June, which is yesterday, for the reason because for us currently, because all this interference on global navigation satellite system, what we call GNSS, has been disrupting quite substantially our capability to do all the automatic algo-based calculation. So we rely on heavily on our manual intervention to make sure that we get the right number, right? So by yesterday, what you see right here is we are about the 60 vessels came back, is having, we have the capacity inside. Of course, you have to take into account of two things. One is like one's going out of zones, and one is coming back. And we see still both ways that the vessels are traveling. And that kind of backs the argument on the point already against the Homer. You mentioned that there are the continued loading taking place. This view, you can see it from here, is what it shows is all the commodity on water within the Middle East Gulf zones. So currently it's already filled with tank, laden status, and then the traveling or either floating. Aggregate of this information point to rather high points, nearing 60 million barrels, in fact. And it has been driven predominant by the Iraq. So you can see it from Al-Basras, all the crews prior to the war around says about 10 million barrels. And now it's almost doubles at 21 million barrels that reached out. And that implies that they try to load as much as possible in current situations, and then to the point that they wanted to get the barrels out of the zones. So that has been confirmed by the views that we see it in our commodity on water matrix. And again, this is accumulations of the vessels loaded and traveling within the regions. So of course, the ones that goes out systematically being removed, and those ballast vessels that you saw it earlier, that coming back a little bit, those are the ones that try to load the cargo, and then you're gonna see turning into this view. So at this point, we see that we will continue to see the vessels loaded, and we continue to see sustained commodity on water for the time being. And I also mentioned earlier about all this interference on the GNSS. What that means exactly, it means this is the pretty much good illustrations of what's happened when you just shows all the vessels movement. I'm showing only the ones on crude tankers and the products tankers. And you see, we put all the lines or the traveling trajectories of every vessels traveling through this zone. And then we see that you see this massive spikes around here and around here. And this is in fact Iranian territories. And then those are the one Assyria and Bandar Tahrir. Is these two zones is the ones that each time there's some kind of interference of GNSS system, meaning that sort of GPS or locations identification systems, the vessels signaling the wrong positions and point always towards these two parts or on this part nearby. What does it? What that means? Basically, that's resulting or the navigation risk for these vessel owners. And then, of course, if they are not, if each vessels are not having the right locations, essentially means that they are not. They have to rely based on either on the radars or visual checks on the vessel surrounding. And of course, there was some incident took place in the fire took place outside of the zone that was not due to this the interference. So far, we didn't see any signs that it has been caused. This interference caused that accident. But for sure, those people, seafarers, actually traveling in this zone, they must be very concerned, and they must be very stressed by the situations that they are traveling through this part of the zones. And what it does to us is exactly the same things. And also it results us for to having the right numbers right away, so that we have to have lots of manual interventions. And again, I'm showing here on the two zones, one on Asturias and then Aslaya on the southern side, and then Bandar Tahrir on the northern side. The signals, the interference take place in very different timing during the days and different part of the zones. Intensity also different. It's quite common that you see all day long, but its intensity has been substantially different, depends on the days. Like the one, if I move this one, this is all the vessel we tracked by the marine traffic systems that we see all the, it's not just about crude tankers, but all the vessel carrying the AIS transponders. You see these numbers, and you see, if you move this one, there are concentrations around Aslahe side, but then that goes to change the direction, having this intensities, and then disperse and go into other places. And you see now this is going to the other side, which is on the Bandar and Tahrir side. So you see that the intensities and then also the concentrations of these signals, wrong signals have been substantially changed over the day as well. And what this looks like in the most recent
Yue, I'm going to have to cut in. I'm sorry. We've got maybe 8 or 9 minutes for questions, so I'm just going to cut in here. Really appreciate that coverage. I'm going to go ahead and bring everyone back into the chat here. Hamayun, Amina, and of course, Yue. We're going to take some questions here. Amina, if you're there, I'm going to start with you. Maybe just again, if we back out here, set the scene for where we are, where we're at, kind of, what's the path forward from here? Where do you see things going in this conflict? Just your broad views.
That's a really tricky question, Reed. I don't think anyone knows where we're going from here, and I can tell you that there are no exit strategies evident anywhere. But I can tell you that there's no appetite for diplomacy. Even after Trump announced that this attack would be a starting point for Iran to come back to the negotiating table and accept a deal, I don't see any appetite from the Iranians to do that, especially if they're still under attack every day. So the diplomacy is off the table. Where we go from here, I'm not sure, since no one has an exit strategy, but we do see for the time being, I mean, this conflict kind of prolonging a little bit, and this is something that Iran has also prepared for and doesn't mind having a longer conflict with kind of low impact happening over a big duration of time. Of course, that can quickly change if we see any kind of deviation from the targets. If they do close the Strait of Hormuz, for example, if they do target assets in the Gulf region, if they target bases, that would add a layer of complication and possibly escalate things. And Trump did say if that happened, the US would go again and attack more sites in Iran.
All right. And maybe just to kind of build on that as well, um, what's the relationship with, Iran and Russia and China? Kind of how are those three players working together or not working together at this moment in time?
Well, they are allies. I mean, Iran is an ally of Russia and an ally of China. Something that is happening is that the Iranian foreign minister who is in Istanbul and gave a speech from Istanbul today, he'll be traveling to Russia to meet President Putin, and he's also traveling to China. So we'll be watching these talks very carefully. And of course, Iran will be asking for support. Now, I don't expect that Russia and China would want to enter the conflict, but perhaps they would be able to provide some level of support, either if it's military or repairs, etc., to Iran. But I don't expect them to take an active part in this escalation.
All right. Humayun, coming to you next. Many questions around expectations for will the Strait of Hormuz get closed? Maybe just provide your thoughts on if that were to happen. Where do you see oil prices going? And again, any other thoughts you have on this? Questions coming from across the range on this issue.
Yeah, sure. No, I think, I mean, we said it in the presentation that this remains highly unlikely for several reasons. Iran would heal itself. It would hit its neighbors with which, it has improved its relationship over the past 2 years. These neighbors, at least officially, are supporting Iran in this war. It would have to, again, violate, say, Oman's territorial waters, and it would impact its main customer, its only customer for crude, actually, and main customer of fuel oil and LPG, which is China. So all reasons why we think that the probability remains very, very low. Again, I would say less than 5%. But we come into an area, as you guys have mentioned, that we could see more irrationality play out, especially from the Iranian side. Where do we see prices go? It's obviously very hard to give a hard number on this, but I think this is where actually prices would go kind of crazy. I think tomorrow at the opening, we're not likely to see a huge move. I mean, we're going to see a big move. If I were to give my own opinion, I think it'd be about 7% high, between 7 and 10%. But I actually think that there is scope to see those that increase, come back through the day as there are more signs of de-escalation on both sides, even though there are some harsh words on the Iranian side. But I think if this were to happen, probably we should see prices easily above $100 per barrel. I'm just thinking, of the Russia-Ukraine situation as an analog. We saw prices go to 120 and Brent even close to 140. So I think we should be aiming for that kind of range in prices, around 120, 130, I'd say. But I think if this were to happen, sorry, I'm being a bit long in my answer. I don't think it would last long. I think you'd have the Navy from the US, in the region intervene very fast. It'd be supported officially by the Europeans and even unofficially by the Chinese, because this affects them. So I think if this were to happen, it wouldn't last more than a few days. Iran's Navy would probably get destroyed in a matter of hours or days.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hamayoun. And on that point, just getting some questions around U.S. Military positioning near the Strait. Of course, there was already a single carrier strike group there, which does include an American aircraft carrier. A second carrier strike group was moved into the region over the past 4 days. So America's force posture right outside the Strait of Hormuz is very aggressive at the moment. Just kind of moving on now, some technical questions. Hamayoun, just going to stay with you on this. Just questions around, again, maybe if you can talk on alternate ways to export crude that do not require the Strait of Hormuz, maybe the East-West pipeline. Again, if you could maybe just reiterate availability along that pipeline and what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that pipeline, according to Aramco, its capacity has been increased from 5 to 7 million barrels per day. It mainly is used as, to feed the refineries on the west coast. So you have the Yanbu refinery, you have the Petro Rabigh refinery, the Yasref refinery, Samref refinery. The Jizan refinery is not directly linked to the pipeline, but but it receives shipments from the Yanbu and Muajiz terminals, which are linked to the pipeline. So in total, if you take those refineries together, it's almost, it's like 1.8, 1.9 million barrels per day that are fed by that pipeline. You have another 700, 800 KBD that is then exported towards Europe via the Ain Sokhna pipeline in Egypt. So in total, it's about 2.5 million barrels per day being used. And again, if you compare it with 7 million barrels per day capacity, that means another 4.5 that is idle that could get used. In Abu Dhabi, the UAE, it's used at around 1.1, 1.2 million barrels per day, and the capacity is 1.5. So there could be another 400 KBD of Murban, mainly because it really takes the onshore Abu Dhabi crude, which is Murban grade, being exported from that terminal. Potentially, it seems that they could be using some some drag reducing agents. That means that in the short term, the throughput could be increased to 1.8 million barrels per day from 1.5, but I doubt that this could last for a long time. Looking at the rest of the countries, Iran itself has the Jos terminal capacity is 3 to 500 KBD, much less than the exports right now from Harg, which are at 1.6 million barrels per day. And the other countries, they do not have any solution. Even Iraq, which has the northern pipeline through Turkey and Ceyhan, 90% of its production is produced in the south. So there's no easy way to bring the crude from the south of Iraq to the north. So I think it means about 5 million barrels per day could be exported from Saudi and the UAE, and from Iran itself, a maximum of 3 to 500 KBD. But the rest would have to shut down.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Hamayoun. We are past the 40-minute mark. Again, thanks everyone for joining. We're going to call it there. For those of you who are Insights clients, you can access this recording at all times on our website. We will also make the slides available. For those of you who have not heard of Kepler Research before, we are putting out research like this every single day. Reach out to sales@kepler.com. We'll get you set up with a trial to check out what we're doing. Again, thanks for joining, and we'll continue to roll through these webinars as events unfold in the Middle East. Until then, take it easy. Bye-bye.